The rain came down in sheets that November evening, each drop hammering against the pavement like tiny fists demanding to be heard. Sarah Mitchell stood under the flickering streetlight outside the downtown clinic, her scrubs soaked through, her hands trembling, not from the cold but from the weight of what she'd just witnessed. Another patient lost, another family shattered, another reminder that sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, how desperately you care, it isn't enough. She closed her eyes and let the rain wash over her face, mixing with tears she'd been holding back for the past 6 hours. This was supposed to be her calling. This was supposed to mean something. But right now, standing alone in the dark, it felt like nothing more than an endless cycle of heartbreak. She didn't notice the woman at first. Most people wouldn't have. The elderly figure was huddled in the doorway of a closed bakery across the street, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing that had long ago lost their ability to provide warmth. But something made Sarah look up. Maybe it was the soft humming that carried across the empty street, a melody so pure and unexpected that it cut through the rain like a beam of light. Or maybe it was just timing, that mysterious force that brings two strangers together at exactly the moment they both need it most. Sarah crossed the street without thinking, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten. Up close, she could see the woman was older than she'd first appeared, her face mapped with lines that told stories of decades lived hard. But her eyes were bright, impossibly bright. And when she looked up at Sarah, there was no plea for help, no desperation, just a quiet recognition, as if she'd been expecting her. "You look like you've had a rough day, honey," the woman said, her voice raspy but warm. Sarah let out a laugh that was more sob than anything else. "You could say that. I'm a nurse, and I lost someone today, a kid, 17 years old with his whole life ahead of him, and I couldn't save him." The woman nodded slowly, patting the dry concrete beside her. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before sitting down, propriety and professionalism dissolving in the face of bone-deep weariness. "I'm Margaret," the woman said. "And before you ask, yes, I live on the streets. Have for 3 years now, ever since my daughter died and I lost everything trying to pay her medical bills." She said it matter-of-factly, without a trace of self-pity. "But you know what I learned out here? Every single person you meet is carrying something heavy. Every single one. The fancy lawyers in their suits, the teenagers with their headphones, even the folks who walk right past me like I'm invisible. Everyone's got their burden." Sarah wiped her eyes. "How do you do it? How do you stay, I don't know, human? Out here alone, forgotten?" Margaret's laugh was surprisingly musical. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not forgotten. Not anymore. See, when you lose everything, when you're stripped down to just yourself, you start seeing what really matters. And you know what matters? The little things. The moments of connection. The chances to make someone else's day just a tiny bit better." She reached into one of her many pockets and pulled out a small, battered notebook. Its cover was held together with tape, and the pages were yellowed and worn. "This is my book of hers," Margaret explained, opening it carefully. "Every page is about a woman I've met out here who did something kind, who saw me, who reminded me that humanity isn't dead, it's just hiding sometimes." Sarah leaned in, reading the cramped handwriting by the streetlight. There was the story of Rosa, the waitress who brought Margaret hot coffee every morning before her shift. Jennifer, the young mother who sat down and told Margaret about her day while her toddler napped in the stroller. Diane, who brought blankets every winter and always included a handwritten note. Page after page of small kindnesses, documented like precious treasures. "Why her?" Sarah asked softly. "Because women understand," Margaret said simply. "We understand what it's like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to have people make assumptions about who we are based on how we look or where we come from. And we understand the power of reaching out, even when we're barely holding on ourselves." Something shifted in Sarah's chest. She thought about her own day, about the mother of the boy she'd lost, how the woman had gripped her hand and thanked her even in her grief, about her colleague Maria, who'd covered her patients so she could take a moment to cry, about the grandmother in room 304 who always asked how Sarah was doing before talking about her own pain. "Tell me about your day," Margaret said, and Sarah did. She talked about the fear and the frustration, about feeling helpless and small against forces she couldn't control. She talked about her doubts, her exhaustion, her fear that she was burning out and losing the compassion that had drawn her to nursing in the first place. Margaret listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. When Sarah finally ran out of words, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I think? I think you're exactly where you need to be. That boy's last hours were spent with someone who cared, really cared. His mother held the hand of someone who fought for her son with everything she had. That matters, honey. That matters more than you know." Sarah felt something break open inside her, and she cried properly for the first time since the shift began. Margaret put a weathered arm around her shoulders and held her while the rain continued to fall, and neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. As the rain finally began to ease, Sarah made a decision. "Come with me," she said. "I have a spare room in my apartment. It's small, but it's warm and dry, and you shouldn't be out here." Margaret smiled but shook her head. "That's kind of you, but this is where I need to be. This is where I meet people who need meeting. But there is something you could do for me." She held out the notebook. "Add your story. Not about me helping you, but about someone who helped you today. Start seeing the hers in your own life, because once you start looking, you'll find them everywhere." Sarah took the notebook with shaking hands and wrote about Maria, about the grandmother, about the mother who thanked her even in her darkest hour. When she finished, Margaret took it back and carefully tore out several blank pages from the back, handing them to Sarah. "Start your own book," she said. "And when those pages are full, pass some on to someone else who needs reminding." Over the next weeks, Sarah did exactly that. She documented every act of kindness she witnessed, every moment of connection, every time someone chose compassion over convenience. She wrote about the teacher who stayed late to help a struggling student, the cashier who paid for a customer's groceries when their card was declined, the teenage girl who stood up for a classmate being bullied. But more than that, she started being her own her for others. She volunteered at the community clinic on her days off. She started a support group for nurses dealing with compassion fatigue. She made it a point to really see the people around her, to ask how they were doing and actually listen to the answer. 3 months later, Sarah returned to that same street corner, looking for Margaret to tell her about the ripples her simple wisdom had created. But Margaret was gone. The bakery owner said she'd left one morning and never came back. Sarah felt a pang of worry and regret. But then she noticed something tucked into the doorway where Margaret used to sit. It was a small bundle wrapped in plastic to protect it from the weather. Inside was Margaret's notebook, filled now from cover to cover with stories of kindness. And on the last page, in handwriting Sarah recognized, was a final entry. "To whoever finds this, these pages hold proof that we are not alone, that kindness is not dead, that every single one of us has the power to be someone's light in the darkness." I'm moving on now, but this book stays. Add your story. Share it with someone who needs hope. And remember that every time you choose compassion, you become a her in someone else's story. That's the real power of humanity. It multiplies. It grows. It refuses to die. Keep it alive. Pass it on. Be her for someone today. Sarah clutched the notebook to her chest, understanding flooding through her. Margaret had been right all along. It wasn't about grand gestures or solving every problem. It was about showing up, about seeing people, about choosing kindness even when you were barely holding on yourself. Especially then. She took the notebook home and carefully transcribed every story, creating copies that she left in hospital waiting rooms, coffee shops, and bus stops across the city, each with the same instruction. Add your story. Pass it on. Be her. The movement grew quietly, organically. People started sharing their own stories online using the hashtag #BeHer. Women and men from all walks of life documented moments of kindness they'd witnessed or received. Teachers, nurses, cashiers, executives, students, everyone had their own her stories to tell, and Sarah, standing at her locker at the end of another long shift, reading messages from people whose lives had been touched by the simple act of acknowledging kindness, finally understood what Margaret had been trying to tell her. She hadn't lost her calling that rainy November night. She'd found it again, stripped down to its purest form. Because in the end, being human isn't about never failing or never hurting. It's about continuing to show up, continuing to care, continuing to see the humanity in others even when the world makes it hard. It's about being someone's her, Their reason to believe that compassion still exists, that kindness still matters, that they are seen and valued. As Sarah headed out into the evening, she made a conscious decision to notice the people around her, to really see them. And there, holding the door open with a tired smile, was a young woman in hospital scrubs who looked exactly like Sarah had felt months ago. Sarah paused, met her eyes, and said simply, "Rough day?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You have no idea." Sarah smiled and gestured toward the coffee shop across the street. "Come on. Let me buy you a coffee and tell you about someone I met once." And the circle continued, one her at a time, proving that the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest waves of change. Because every person who feels seen passes that gift on. Every moment of compassion multiplies. Every time someone chooses to be her, the world becomes a little bit brighter, a little bit more human, a little bit more hopeful. That's the power we all hold. The power to be the light in someone else's darkness. To be the reminder that humanity, in all its beautiful, messy, complicated glory, is still very much alive.